Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Casey Council meeting on the 1st of September. I'd like to welcome those members of our community that are watching live stream and just remind everybody that in line with restrictions by the Victorian Government on public gatherings due to COVID-19, the public gallery for the meeting is closed and the meeting is being held virtually and publicly live streamed in keeping with the good practice guidelines issued by the Minister for Local Government. I'd like to start this afternoon by introducing myself, Nolene Duff, as the Chair of the Panel of Administrators, and introduce my colleague administrators, Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon.
And Cameron Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon.
And also to welcome our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Glenn Patterson, and the officers supporting the meeting this afternoon being Jacinta McLeod and Jordan Barfoot. Thank you. I'd like to open the meeting with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respects to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to a remarkable diversity of cultures, languages, faiths, identities, landscapes and stories. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. These intersecting and overlapping community stories form Casey's collective identity and contribute to its evolving rich history. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. Move to item 2, the confirmation of minutes of the council meeting held on the 18th of August. Do I have a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes?
I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mover. Seconder?
Second.
Mr Boardman. All in favour? Carried. Item 3, declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under section 79 of the Local Government Act 1989 and have no conflict of interest to declare relevant to any matters on the agenda this afternoon. I also note that no officers have declared a conflict of interest, and I just want to confirm that neither of my fellow administrators have any conflicts of interest to declare. None to declare. We note that in the minutes. Thank you. I move to item 4, public question time. And we have 2 questions this afternoon, which I will read prior to responding. The first question is from Litza Grace. And the question is, I have searched the council website for a list of churches and there is no listing at all. Why is that, please? And question 2 is from Norma Kaiser. The first question, and Ms Kaiser has 2 questions. First one, how are the diverse residents within the City of Casey to gain support through this COVID time if the City of Casey select what they believe are the only services that are of value to the public? Second question is, when will vital services of the churches be reinstated on the City of Casey website, as I wish to publicly announce the action of the removal of churches and the inability to fund the support networks they provide as has and are putting residents of the City of Casey at increased risk. I thank both submitters for their questions. Both of these matters have been similarly dealt with at earlier council meetings and responded to. So I'm going to this afternoon request that officers respond directly to both of the submitters and respond to their questions, and we'll be able to restate the responses that have been previously made in public council meetings. Now move on to officers' reports, and the first item we have is item 5.1, the Audit and Risk Committee Chair. I am proposing that we defer this matter, and I seek confirmation of that deferral from my colleague administrators. Do I have a mover?
I'm happy to move that deferral. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Seconder?
Yes, I second that.
And I'll put that straight to the vote to defer item 5.1 to a future council meeting. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.2 is the draft affordable housing strategy, and I invite a mover for that report.
I'll move that.
Mr. Belmar, seconded. Mr. Boardman, and Mr. Belmar, I invite you to speak to the report.
Thank you, Chair. I might just take a few moments in my statements, Chair.
Sure. Please proceed.
I've had the opportunity to review the briefing paper prepared by council officers, and this is an extensive piece of work that's been undertaken by council, and the genesis of it is, among other things, that in June 2018 an objective was added to the Planning and Environment Act of Victoria, and that objective was to facilitate the provision of affordable housing in Victoria. And affordable housing is defined as housing including social housing that is appropriate for the housing needs of any of the following: very low income households, low income households, and moderate income households. So this is important work that's being done by council in working towards the strategy that we'll be adopting today, which meets an objective set by government to properly investigate the needs of the entire community, and in this case, community in need, which is in need of affordable housing. There's been substantial engagement with the community in preparing these documents. That engagement included receiving over 300 submissions, conducting interviews and conversations with parts of the community that are intimately involved with these issues, and overall there were over 350 engagements with the community. Now, as part of this work, council had the opportunity to have access to state government funds which have financed part of this work, and that has resulted in the documents that are attached to the agenda today, which are a suite of documents: a draft affordable housing strategy, an affordable housing strategy background paper, a Casey social and affordable housing needs assessment, and a draft affordable housing strategy action plan. And the key issues that I take away from these documents is that what council is adopting tonight is not just a suite of documents which make positive statements about this important issue, but actually set out the strategy that it will engage in to achieve the delivery of affordable housing in Casey. And that is going to be achieved by 3 strategic principles: advocacy, partnership, and facilitating. Now, ultimately, council is not in the business of building housing, but through adopting this strategy, it will undertake the necessary work that it can do to ensure that affordable housing is available in the city of Casey. And for those reasons, I move this motion and commend it.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Briefly, if I could, Chair, following my colleague Mr. Belmar's introductory remarks and references his point around council not being in the business of actually being a builder or a provider of housing per se, and noting some of the feedback specifically from developers in the background paper, which is one of the attachments that Mr. Belmar's referenced. And this goes to the issue around consistency and clear communication. And developers have made it quite clear to council that if there is going to be contributions required through this policy and other strategies to address some of the challenges that are clearly identified that are not unique to Casey, but are somewhat amplified in Casey because of obvious reasons in the second attachment to the paper, they do need to be communicated up front so that developers particularly can understand the needs and make any adoptions or necessary changes to any applications in an immediate capacity and before they actually get too far down the feasibility phases. This also goes to the issue of ensuring that if there is any expectations or any other matters to be considered through the development of precinct structure plans, that we are equally ensuring that developers understand that. What is probably one of the other critical points, Chair, is that the strategy in the background paper also identified that these themes were identified and equally agreed to by the regional housing associations, that the facilitation and the platform mechanism that councils and municipalities can provide is critical so that all parties to providing the actual needs and addressing some of the concerns are aware of how they can contribute, the roles that they play, and importantly, the guidelines are clear and communicated quite significantly in the first instance. So I think from a Casey perspective, we have not only identified how significant this problem is, we've tried to provide a framework which addresses the problem, but equally gives that clarity to ultimately the individuals and the organisations that are going to be providing the solution, to communicating upfront the expectations, to identifying and facilitating processes to address the need and matching demand with supply, so we actually can go about reducing the consequences of what is a devastating social issue in the future. And with those words, Chair, I'm delighted to second the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman, and I'd just like to endorse the comments you've both made. This is a very complex area of social policy that translates into some pretty challenging issues at the local level. And I agree that council can have an advocacy and facilitating role, but it certainly is determined within that framework of the state government policy as well. So that's another area of advocacy that's outlined in our action plan. So I certainly support the recommendation and endorse the motion. Can I put that motion to the vote? All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3, adoption of Casey Activity Centre Strategy and Amendment C258. Do I have a mover?
Chair, I will be delighted to move this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I second that.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Please speak to the report.
This equally is a very significant piece of work, and from the outset, I think all of us will be acknowledging the effort of all the council officers across many of the business units who's been involved in the preparation of this particular strategy, not just in developing the strategy following the action plan and the requirements under the Plan Melbourne aspects, but commencing the panel process and coming up with Amendment C258, going through the public exhibition and ultimately the final strategy for adoption or discussion initially and then adoption tonight. A really significant and high quality piece of work, one that we have internally analysed and considered extensively. And I think deservedly it requires, in a public contest, further exploration of the key issues and descriptions of some of the implications. Chair, we do have 7 recommendations. That's to adopt the strategy itself. We do need to note the action plan. There is a number of aspects in the action plans, particularly the assessment matrix, the decision guidelines, talking about some of the historical consequences, and the list of the 48 current and the 32 planned activity centres. We also note the panel report in regards to the amendment of C258, the 15 submissions, the hearings that were conducted, and the feedback from the recommendations, not just from the panel report itself, but also from council officers, all of which have been adopted and were quite constructive feedback and helpful recommendations. We are ensuring that we adopt C258, we submit the amendment to the Minister of Planning for approval, and that we notify all submitters of the outcome from the resolution, assuming that it does pass tonight. Why this has happened, I think, is probably the best place to start. We're in an environment where planning is going to be a significant impetus for future economic development. And if we just look at the restrictions that we, for the most part, understand are currently confronting the citizens of Casey and arguably all of Victoria, to have that 20-minute hub, if you like, of an activity centre is more critical now than it ever has been. And so the requirements under Plan Melbourne and how they can be applied and how we from a municipal basis can provide, again, certainty to the developer community, certainty to our citizens around that we're meeting the requirements under the strategic framework and ensuring that our responses are clear, transparent and responsive to all of those concurrent needs is pretty crucial. I don't think there's been a point in time where they've been more crucial. But we are trying to go a little bit beyond just what Plan Melbourne has ascertained. We are trying to have a very clear understanding of some of the local context which exists in the municipality and adapting the framework so that each of the 80 identified activity centres, their unique characters, their amenity, their accessibilities, their diversity, their transport links, the other recreational, hospitality, retail type of activities are all considered, understand, communicated and have, most importantly, community buy-in. So the motivations, the three key themes, a citywide network of activity centres, they are understanding that these are undoubtedly the economic engines of Casey, and they are, as I think it's quite clearly saying, that they are a great place for the people to meet, to shop, to socialise, to be entertained, to pursue recreational activities, etc. The other thing I note is that in the current lockdowns is that the whole change to the scope of employment and how we go about work is more profound now than it ever has been. If we go back to 2012 to the original strategy, there was a significant emphasis on trying to diversify what was predominantly a retail type of employment environment within the municipality. But with everyone working from home and with the diversity and the changes that's undoubtedly going to continue to occur in regards to future work patterns, ensuring that our activity hubs meet those requirements are absolutely critical. So to come up with a clear set of guidelines, to understand the historical context, to extrapolate that and put it into a modern framework that's future-proofed and allows our communities to really understand clearly and quite consistently what we're trying to achieve with this strategy, I think has been a significant output. And again, I really commend the council officers involved with this. I do want to thank the panellists, the chair and the panel members. The panel report was very helpful. As I said, the 6 recommendations have been adopted by council, and the 15 people who provided submissions and participated in addition to those submissions into the hearings process. It's been a very significant process that commenced, as I said, last year with the October-December exhibition phase. We had the final panel report presented to us on the 21st of July. We have discussed this internally, and it is now at a stage where we are providing that clarity on what the assessment matrix, the guidelines, the reasons for assessing these proposals, consistent with the 48 current and 32 newly identified activity centres, so that we can provide a much more harmonious, focused, community-oriented, activity centre-driven policy for the Casey ratepayers. And with those remarks, Chair, I am delighted to move it and again commend all those who have contributed to the process.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Very comprehensive comments there. Mr Belmar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I second the motion, and I note the comprehensive comments made by Mr Boardman. I would briefly like to commend council officers who have worked on this project. This is a massive piece of work. Councils do a number of things. They maintain roads and things of that activity, of that nature, but a major part of any council's work is its strategic planning, how a community will function in the future, and its activity centres is a critical part of that. I commend the work, it's important work, and I'll leave it to the next step in a statutory process for the Parliament to consider the material. And with that, I second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I share those comments, and I do agree the work that is undertaken in strategic planning, particularly in a community such as Casey, is just so fundamental, providing, you know, the backbone and the direction to officers for decision making, and the direction, and as you've said, Mr Boardman, certainty to the development community and the broader community as well. So a very comprehensive, well executed and undertaken piece of work. So I put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.4, the reallocation of the remaining Beric South DCP funds. Do I have a mover? Mr Belmar? Seconder? Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I will make some brief comments about this. This is perhaps in keeping with the previous motion and the comments we've made about planning and the role of strategic planning. These are funds that require reallocation as a consequence of the Beric South DCP having done its work, and there are funds that can now be redirected to purposes that council and its officers believe are appropriate. There is a statutory process that's required for that to be fulfilled, and by passing this motion, we're ensuring that the statutory process can be undertaken and that the funds which were collected and can now be used in a way that will continue to benefit the community. And for all those reasons, I move this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. There's really not much to add except the direction the remaining funds will be reallocated to the Manly Gardens estate. Local AFL cricket facilities have been articulated in the papers, and to fulfil our statutory obligations and ensure that, again, we are being true to meeting the expectations of the community. This is a very procedural but yet necessary recommendation. I'm pleased to support it.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.5, Debt Management Sundry Debtors. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr. Boardman, would you like to speak to the motion?
It is a topical but important part of our financial management processes that we identify and are being clearly transparent with the considerations and the management of bad debts. And in this instance, of course, we are referring to non-statutory debts, so non-rateable debts. These are debts where council has introduced contracts or entered into contracts or other financial arrangements, and for the reasons articulated in section 4.3, clearly in the new policy that replaces the 2017 policy, council has to make decisions regarding from cost efficiency, likelihood of recovery, and also preventing any further unnecessary or avoidable legal action to obviously write off the debts. Now, whilst we can talk about this in a very clear and, as I said, transparent manner, it needs to be referenced not just as a standalone policy. It does have some significant impacts from a delegations perspective as it relates to the Chief Executive Officer and members of his team. And it is also something that does not in any way give a green light to anyone who is doing business with council to think that we are not going to have the utmost diligence and clarity of processes around ensuring that financial performance underlies all of our administrative arrangements. It is, as I said, replacing the 2017 policy. There is a requirement to review this every I think 3 years. We will be reviewing this again in a further period that's articulated in section 8 of the review. And there is also a note in the recommendation, 345,000 unrecoverable sundry debts for the last financial year, which have now been written off, and explanations as to the reasons for that have been articulated in the report. There is really not much more I can say. Is that it is, as I said, a document that needs to be reviewed and considered along with delegations. There is a very clear management process accompanying this. There is a risk framework that us as administrators and the executives themselves apply to finalising decision on whether a debt will be written off or otherwise, but at least it does provide clarity and consistency as to how those decisions are made, and with that, it is an important part of our financial management apparatus, and I'm pleased to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Belmar, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I could second the motion by making some brief remarks. this is an important policy. It's important that the community can have confidence in the way in which debts owed to the City of Casey are managed and followed up. Those invoices aren't issued lightly, and they're only done in circumstances where it's clear that service delivery and intent for invoices need to be paid. The paper makes clear that there is some general good practice and uplift required in how debts owing to council are tracked and followed up by officers. And the paper also highlights the challenges that we've had during the year in reviewing those, and we take assurance from the independent audit that's been conducted. And I'm willing to support also the consolidation into one policy. Mr. Boardman has explained the reasons for that, and I won't restate them. And for all those reasons, I second this motion.
Thank you. So I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Now move to item 5.6, the 2019-20 budget outcome, financial statements, performance statement and aquatic centre critical works. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder? Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Yes, I move this motion for the approval of the draft financial statements and performance statement for the 2019-20 financial year in accordance with the Local Government Act. This item marks an important milestone in the governance of the City of Casey, as it represents the delivery of key public financial accountability on behalf of the Council to the Casey community and to the Parliament of Victoria. The performance statement and the financial statement highlight the performance of the organisation over the past financial year, a year that, as we all know, has been characterised by significant challenges. The documents demonstrate that Casey has been able to meet that challenge. During the year, Casey has delivered against the performance metrics within the local government performance reporting framework, and they allow for comparisons to be made across the sector. At Casey, the performance for the year includes higher infrastructure per head of population relative to previous levels, mainly reflecting the capital works program and the revaluation of physical assets delivered during the year. Lower staff turnover relative to previous levels due to a slower level of staff leaving the organisation, and a realisation of the challenges due to the COVID-19 disruptions, specifically in relation to lower utilisation of council facilities. The budget position critically continues to be solid within the year, and it is memorable for the delivery of a record of $200 million in capital works program, coupled with a strong net result of over $160 million. Where we have been able to perform favourably to budget, we are now being asked to direct funds, which have been identified as $1.4 million, to address the need for urgent works at Casey ARC. We've been briefed on those works by officers, and I am pleased to lend my support to that work. That work has become necessary due to deficiencies in the structure of the Casey ARC, and that work can be done and will ensure that the facility will be available in an appropriate time when the lockdowns have been either ended or reduced or changed in some way. Hopefully that won't happen too far in the future. Whilst today is an important milestone for the community, it is by no means an endpoint for the 2019 and 20 financial year. In coming meetings, we will need to consider the culmination of statutory reports and other important community-centric messaging which is consolidated in the annual report. The annual report is currently scheduled for consideration on the 20th of October 2020, and I look forward to the continued development of this material and the opportunity to further demonstrate the financial accountability to the community and the continued delivery of services. With those remarks, I move this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, I invite you to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Belmar, for that comprehensive analysis. I start by supporting the recommendation to reprioritise funds to address the maintenance and repair issues at the KCARC. That is a very important and urgent requirement, and for the reasons articulated, we need to fast track that as quickly as possible and get the facility up to a state that once the community can start visiting the facility again, it is safe and accessible to do so. In regards to the financial statements and performance statement, of course, I'm going to support the recommendations. It's usually at this time of year when we're dealing with audits and the lodgement of financial returns and director statements in a company environment, we get all very excited because we can either see how much we have been successful with our budgetary and other forecast requirements or otherwise. Sadly, this year, we are in the otherwise category, not just this municipality, but every organisation in the country, if not globally. The disruption and the financial pressures that are caused by not just the COVID health issues, but by the policy response to those issues at both state and the national level is going to have ongoing uncertainty and significant financial impact. There's no doubt about that. And it's probably worthwhile noting that a significant consequence of those policy responses is that unemployment in Casey may peak at around 10%. It may, in fact, go higher. It is disturbing to read that it is not just the baseline unemployment rate that is nationally approaching 8%. The underemployment rate is around about 13%. And of those who currently have full-time work, there is a underproductivity rate of around about 19%, i.e. employees who virtually have nothing to do. And that will result in further rationalisation. It will result in undoubtedly further financial hardship for many members of our community. Businesses will, as a consequence of that, suffer, and that will have impact upon their capacities to not just meet their rates and other statutory obligations, but also from a demand perspective on the impacts it'll have from the developer community to try and address some of the housing and other real estate and commercial stock levels to meet what would be, in any usual circumstances, a growing society and a growing demand for such facilities. The uncertainty of the future probably requires some reconsideration of that. But from a council perspective, as the financial statements have identified, we are a significant enterprise in our own right. We do manage in excess of $5.7 billion of assets. There has been an 8% growth in the valuation of the assets in the last financial year. And it's also very pleasing to note that we have achieved a record investment of over $200 million in capital works. Whilst I talk about the negatives, the positives equally need to be acknowledged. The state government's been quite forthright in identifying a number of stimulus packages which will provide further economic incentive for us to up our capital works budgets and to provide further opportunities for local investment, whether they be recreational facilities, amenities, capital works or improvements. And we'll make some announcements on those and how we've been successful in the near future. But they are also important economic stimuli, as is the activity centre strategy that we have discussed in this meeting, as is the affordable housing strategy we've discussed in this meeting, as is the suite of other policies and responses we've discussed in previous meetings. The panel is committed, the executive is committed, everyone who works at the organisation is committed to leveraging our financial position, leveraging the stimulator, leveraging any other opportunities that we can from a state and federal basis to provide the best possible forward plan of expenditure, projects and other initiatives to try and buttress some of these challenges that undoubtedly we're all going to be felt with. It's got to be the underlying principle from us as administrators and from the council as a whole that we will do everything we can to limit the impact that'll have on our community. We will equally do everything we can to provide economic certainty and activity and stimulus to hopefully get some degree of consistency and investment into the future. The real work probably hasn't commenced. It will commence in the not too distant future as we begin planning for the budget cycle into next and subsequent financial years. But we do have a relatively strong starting position, and I commend the CFO, his team, and everyone involved in the preparation of the accounts for ensuring that there is the sustainability, there is adequate liquidity in the business, and that we do have a firm foundation for us to further invest as necessary. I'd also like to acknowledge the auditors, the council auditors who have given us a clean bill of health for the most part on their performance statements, and also acknowledge the work of the Audit and Risk Committee in their contributions into this quite important process. This is one of the most fundamentally important things that any directors or administrators or councillors can do, but it is a significant team effort below the surface that needs to be acknowledged. We are in a good financial shape at this stage, but as I said, the real work and the real challenges are yet to hit us, but we are prepared as administrators and as the organisation as a whole to adapt and to address those concerns as we need to. I'm pleased to second the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Boardman, and also Mr. Belmar for your comments. I too would like to add my comments to what is, as you've outlined, a very important part of our work during the year. And having been Council's representative on the Audit and Risk Committee in particular since February, I've also had the opportunity to review the Council's performance from that perspective. But as administrators, it is our first responsibility to be accountable for our performance. And in the public sector, it's a core tenet of governance and public accountability that's critical to maintaining the community's confidence in the council as a public institution. So I want to use this time just to convey a sense of the rigour that sits behind the detailed processes that sit behind these final accounts for 2019-20. And I think it's important from a community perspective that people do have an appreciation of that rigour and process and the accountability that follows. So anytime a council officer performs a transaction or exercises their delegated financial responsibilities, that information is captured and reported through our finance systems. And under the leadership of our CEO and the broader executive team, this information is subject to checks and scrutiny and regular reporting internally and publicly throughout the year. In the preparation of the finance and the performance statement that we're considering this afternoon, the relevant officers make all information fully available to external review and audit by representatives of the Victorian Auditor-General's Office. And during the past month of August, that extensive audit was undertaken and an independent opinion, as you've outlined, Mr. Boardman, was provided by the Auditor-General's representatives as to the reliability of Council's performance in the financial and in the performance statements. And as you outlined, that was a clean bill of health. And as I heard firsthand Vago's representatives making comments about the work, they were very praiseworthy of the very clean set of accounts they were given and the cooperation and access to information they were afforded by our CFO and other support officers. So at the Audit and Risk Committee, where I listened to that, as did Mr. Boardman, attended that meeting as well. We saw the culmination of months of work, and I do feel very confident in saying to the community that they should have confidence in this set of accounts, in the performance statements that are accompanying these accounts, and I think that's very important. There's significant transparency in this process, and the state government has in recent years also developed a Know Your Council website, and that is typically available towards the end of the year when the community can make comparisons between various councils in significant groups and look at the performance of those councils against particular service areas. So I encourage people to have a look at that and review that. And every year also the Victorian Auditor-General does a consolidated annual report of local government financial results and performance. And whilst that may not be bedtime reading for many people, it is also a testament to where Casey sits in terms of its future forecast, in terms of its financial performance. It's been a pretty challenging year for the organisation led by our CEO and his executive team. Not only the pandemic, which we've all experienced, but the officers have seen the council sacked, They've sat through an IBAC hearing yet to be concluded and what may follow from that. And I think the fact that they've continued their good work and produced such a clean set of accounts, a transparent and open process that's accessible to our community, led by our CEO, I think we certainly want to offer them a commendation for that work and acknowledge the difficult year that they've had. So on that basis, I too support the motion, and I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you very much. We have one further item and a closed council confidential item, but the next item is 5.7, contract acceptance and sealing. Can I ask for a mover? Mover for item 5.7?
I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder? We got so excited about the accounts, we didn't know where we were. Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I invite you to speak to item 5.7.
Thank you, Chair. This item is a recommendation brought to us by council officers with respect to the award of a tender for bitumen resealing and asphalt resurfacing. In keeping with the previous item in the discussion we've had about careful accounting and careful financial management, a thorough process has been undertaken which included tenders and submissions by 6 submitters seeking to be granted this work. The successful tenderer is contained in the recommendation. It is R&C Asphalt Proprietary Limited, and I am satisfied based on the briefing that we've received, which includes access to a matrix and other documents which show the work that's been undertaken by the tender evaluation team, that this tender and this contract provides the appropriate outcome for council and will ensure that important work is done in a manner that is financially responsible and that the appropriate work's being carried out so that we can provide the community with that assurance.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman?
Thank you, Chair. There's not much further I can add, except that it is a significant piece of work to resurface 104 roads, 2 shopping precincts and 1 car park, as articulated in the Capital Works program for 2020-21, and it absolutely complies with the procurement processes that we have discussed and further or adopted at a past council meeting. So I'm pleased to support the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. I now move to item 6, consideration of reports of committees, and I note the record of discussion as listed in the agenda papers. Item 7, petitions. We have received no petitions for this afternoon's council meeting. Item 8, urgent business. There's no urgent business items for this council meeting. Item 9 is pursuant to section 77(2)(c) of the Local Government Act 1989, the CEO has determined that the reports listed below, that being item 9.1 legal matter, and their attachments are confidential in accordance with section 89(2) of the Local Government Act, as the matter is a legal matter. So I have a recommendation that council move into closed council to consider this matter. Do I have a mover?
I'll move that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And seconder, Mr. Boardman had his hand up as well. So I put that to the vote to move into confidential. Thank you. And thank you to those members of the community who've participated and listened this afternoon. That is the close of the open council meeting this afternoon, and I'd like to thank you all for joining the meeting and watching the live stream. Thank you and good afternoon.